Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Aaron, how are you doing? You and I have not done a show, just you and I, in a long, long time. But good to see you, man. You and I saw each other the other night for a Christmas event. But how you been, man? How you doing?
Been good. Yeah, actually, it was funny before we hit record, I was kind of trying to think back. I was like, man, I don't even know the last time we did a show together.
I know.
Which we'll be correcting going forward in 2026. That's going to be one of the things we're going to be working on. But anyway, We'll talk about that another time.
Yeah. So we are, we're recording this on December 14th. I think we'll get this out around the 17th or whatever the Wednesday show is. So we're getting towards the end of the year. We kind of said, I think we've done enough interview shows for the year. We've got a couple more weekend perspectives, but you and I are going to do 3 wrap-up shows. We're going to do this one on cloud. We're going to do one the next week on AI, and then we're going to do a prediction show. So you and I are at least going to get 3 in a row together, and then maybe a few more, and we'll have to give folks some hints about what we mean by all that towards the end of the show. But this one's going to be kind of state of the cloud as of the end of 2025. A few awards for the year, and just kind of a recap of kind of how we saw the year go from a cloud perspective, not so much an AI perspective. Let's start off with an award. We'll make this interesting. We'll start off with an award. Cloud of the year. What if somebody said, hey, what just for the year of 2025, what would you put out for Cloud of the Year if you were giving out an award?
So I'm going to actually, because it's funny, based off of all my predictions from previous years, you'd think it would be Azure, because I've been rooting for Azure for years now. But I'm actually going to give this one to GCP.
Yeah.
Because I feel like they did the most interesting shit and actually did somewhat of a turnaround, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And just was, if nothing else, they were the most interesting cloud this year. So I think for me it's GCP hands down.
Yeah.
How about you, man?
That was my pick as well. The 2 that I kind of had in mind were GCP, like you said, because not only have they figured out, first and foremost, they started turning a profit, which was, it's been a number of years. They got past the, what was the one statement by Sundar Pichai. I think he said at one point, it was, maybe this was if it's by 2022 or 23, if we're not in the top 2 or 3 clouds, we're going to give up on cloud. And, there was a time, a couple of years ago where people were like, well, maybe they're going to give up on cloud. They're ending the year around a $50 billion a year cloud. They are now profitable for the first time, which is very, very cool. They probably come out of the year looking like not only the cloud with the most momentum, but also the cloud with the sort of their act together the most from an AI perspective. So yeah, I had them as cloud of the year as well. I had Oracle as runner up, as sort of honorable mention or runner up for this one. If for no other reason, then I feel like they kind of came from out of nowhere. I mean, obviously we've been talking to them for a while. We talk to them on and off. Sometimes we don't think they're that interesting, but a couple things happened. I mean, number one, they started winning a whole bunch of deals in the AI specific space, mostly because of their bare metal work. So, they sort of flipped the script on the technology of cloud somewhat. And then Clay, who we've interviewed a number of times, moved from being in charge of Oracle Cloud Infrastructure to being the co-CEO of the company. So, big step up for him. So congratulations to him. But, they're also the cloud that, when we get to the AI portion, when we do that next week, they're the one that has the most, people better be careful as they look at the financials of it, timing and all sorts of things. But so I think we agree on that. Second,
yep, I like it.
Second award I had on here was in the non-AI category. So throw out the AI stuff. Cloud concept of the year. So what was the thing about the cloud that for you got the most attention that maybe you didn't expect, or kind of felt like it was a dominant discussion this year?
Oh gosh. I don't have a good one off the top of my head. Why don't you come back to me? What's yours?
Yeah.
You go first.
So I had
kickstart something for me.
So I had sovereignty as my cloud concept of the year, and I think this was, this was one of the things that we talked about at the beginning of the year, where it was going to be hard to separate, in some cases, like politics from technology, for good or for bad. And it felt like there was just a ton of discussion this year over this concept of sovereignty, whether it was digital sovereignty or data sovereignty. A lot of it was driven out of the EU, but in some cases it was driven by certain government agencies and so forth. Basically worried, for the most part, about storing their data in U.S.-centric, U.S.-owned cloud companies. So whether it was Microsoft or whether it was AWS or whatever, there was a lot going on, for good reasons, at least good political, responsiveness reasons. And so we've seen a lot there. Now, the challenging part about the sovereignty stuff is, if you ask 10 different people, you're going to get 11 different answers as to what sovereignty means to them, right? There's not sort of one answer, but that felt like, as a subcategory of cloud, felt like the most discussed thing for me this year.
No, I like that, and I'll go with mine now. We are going to be talking about outages a little bit later on, but the whole concept of availability zones, I think, would be mine, because the whole idea of like what's old is new again with the outages this year, like it's shocking to me. Well, I shouldn't say shocking to me, because actually here's the thing: availability zones obviously still matter. That was very evident when we had the outages, but also too, it's also pretty complex, and or the amount of resources it takes to do like multi-availability zone to not go down a lot. There's a lot of people out there like, you know what, we're just not going to do that. And
yeah.
And it shows, right? So it'll be really interesting to see going forward. And that's a whole other topic we're going to be talking about, like what happens with outages, right? Like we had a decent number of outages. Now they were all kind of here very recently. I think it was a pretty steady year overall, but I mean, it's still top of mind.
Right. Okay. Third award I've got on here, and we've only got 3 awards. So folks, this isn't going to be like the Oscars where it goes on for 3 hours. I've got 3. Cloud memory of the year. So what was the thing, if you think back on 2025, what's going to be maybe the, either the unique memory for you of the year or sort of the defining memory from a cloud perspective this year?
So I actually think it was going back to OCI, the Oracle Cloud, and them kind of just coming out of nowhere with some of the deals they had. Like if I kind of look back at in the year, like that was the number one thing that popped out where I was like, oh wow, like that really kind of stuck with me of like where'd they do that? How'd they do that? What happened? Love to like someday get the details behind all of that and just the biggest like out of nowhere.
Yeah.
So for me, like that, the kind of that string of OCI cloud announcements and of deals was the big memory for me. How about you?
Yeah, I think I actually feel like, and this is one that'll probably sort of cross over with the AI stuff, but just kind of the insanity of people talking about building out data centers and building out power and building out these things that everybody sort of seemed to forget how math works or how calendars work, and just the amount of capacity that people were talking about, the amount of nuclear, the equivalent of nuclear power plants that would have to get built to do these things. It's a really interesting either preview or disaster waiting to happen. But it is amazing just to sort of see the capacity that's being talked about. I mean, we started the year, and again, like it's going to be weird this is going to be one of those years where we go back to, and if we really we did a really, really thorough review, I mean, we could do a 4 or 5 hour thing. I mean, we were talking at the beginning of the year. I remember, some of the cloud providers were over in Davos, right? It was like, Satya Nadella or Sundar or whatever. And they were like, yeah, we're going to do $20 billion this year in CapEx, and then Sundar was like, well, we're in for $30 billion. And then by the time we got to the middle of the year or towards the end of the year, I mean, they had to raise their projections to $80 billion, $100 billion, and you're just like, number one, I guess, we've been asking this question for years and years. What are they doing hoarding all this cash? They're throwing off all sorts of free cash flow, but just the escalation after escalation after escalation that in just the last year of all of them basically being like, I guess, we saw what happened with Amazon. We let Amazon have a 7-year head start. We're not going to do that again. And, I think that's going to be pretty fascinating to see how the next, X number of years plays out, because it's a lot of capital and it's a lot of schedules that all feel like they're way too tight to sort of meet the numbers they're trying to make.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, I'll kind of throw in maybe like a runner up, because while you were talking about that, it made me think about it. I feel like this year, I mean, one of the things, like my big memory from this year was like, it was the year the finances just didn't make sense anymore. Like, like along those continuing escalation things. Like, I felt like, I mean, in all the years we've been doing this podcast, that like everything kind of made sense in the end, or even if it didn't, like it eventually crashed, and like we could kind of, follow the money, which is something we've said on this podcast over and over. It just quit making sense this year. Like it really just quit making sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the numbers they were so big. It'll be, again, it's going to be fascinating to watch how the next few years play out. Next thing I had on our list was, again, kind of going back to the, following the money, something we talk about all the time. And these are just the numbers, so that we, again, we have yet to talk about AWS. I feel like, we're now 15 minutes into this show or whatever we are. AWS still finished the year at, basically $125 billion run rate. That number still is amazing to me. They finished the year at 125 billion. Azure finished the year somewhere, depending, again, always on accounting, somewhere between like 80 to 100 billion. And Google finished the year at like 50 billion. So, what is that? Almost $300 billion in cloud revenue. Those businesses are amazing. It's, and the crazy thing is, I think if we had, if somebody had said, hey, how much of workloads do you think will be in the cloud by the time those guys all get to $300 billion? You probably would be like, oh, it's going to be, a huge portion of the cloud, because stuff will have gone away and all these sort of things. And, I think people are still probably, if you had to really forecast it, it's probably 10%, 15% of all workloads are in the cloud, something like that.
Yeah.
From an enterprise
it's still the
perspective.
First inning, man.
It's still the first inning of cloud.
15 years in, it's still the first inning of cloud.
Yeah. Well, and it's I guess what the other part of it that's really interesting from a revenue perspective is, sometimes we talk about all three of the cloud providers as if, the hyperscalers are kind of the same and their portfolios are kind of the same. But I mean, the dependencies that their parent companies have on the cloud is now so different. AWS obviously is the cash cow of Amazon Web Services. It is, probably 1A along with the retail business, if not one, in terms of priorities over there. For Google, it's a nice business, but it's probably not in the top, I don't know, 3 or 4 things for Google, maybe. I mean, maybe it's starting to be because of the overlap with AI, but I mean, you've got search, you've got advertising, you've got YouTube, you've got Waymo, you've got all these other things going on. Google feels like it's still, I don't want to say it's not important to them, but it's not, the company's not dependent on it. And then Amazon or Azure is somewhere in between. I mean, I guess Microsoft is very much Azure, but, it feels like the cloud piece of it is more sort of a vehicle for their franchises, their franchises, whether it's Xbox or whether it's Office 365 or GitHub or something else. Like Azure just feels, a little different than the other two. And, I think that makes them all sort of interesting. You can't just analyze them all as one blob. They're unique entities. We just all lump them together as, cloud, hyper clouds.
No, agreed. They have very distinct personalities, and probably those personalities, like what you're saying here, is they've become very differentiated over the last, I don't know, I'd say 2 years. 3 years even. I mean, if you asked me that question a couple years ago, I would have said they're kind of all the same. And, you just kind of map the primitive services and everything was kind of all the same. And they had some specialties here or there, or maybe, we're dealing with certain specific verticals here or there, but no, they're very different in their approaches these days. And, that could be good going forward. I mean, I see that definitely as something that's a good thing for the market going forward.
Next thing I had on our list, and this space a little more, and this is going to overlap a little bit with, I guess, AI with cloud, but the last year and a half, maybe 2 years, there's been this new category of company called NeoClouds, which are, essentially for historical reasons, it's mostly companies that were GPU farms. They originated for the most part because of crypto and variations of crypto. Crypto went through some challenges a couple of years ago that just happened to coincide with generative AI taking off. And so we've seen a number of these companies, start to emerge. There's 4 or 5 of them, probably more than that are out there. Do you consider the NeoClouds kind of a cloud like the hyperscalers, or have you sort of push them off to the side and say, no, they're really just AI clouds. They're really just GPU farms. And so how do you classify, or how do you think about the NeoClouds?
Yeah. So to give everyone some background on it real quick. So you take like the CoreWeaves, the Lambdas, the Nebuuses of the world. And what happens is, they absolutely started out as GPU as a service, but then they didn't want to be labeled GPU as a service. And especially as CoreWeave, pushed for an IPO, they had to be seen as something other than just GPU as a service, right? And so they they needed a new term, a new category. So they said NeoClouds, right? But here's the thing, NeoClouds is an awful freaking name. Like, it's the worst. And now, the closest thing you could call this, if you had to really call it what it is an AI cloud. I mean, because it is, at the end of the day, their GPU as a service is the core offering. But then they're going to offer storage and networking and all these other things around them. But at the end of the day, it's a bunch of companies that bought a whole bunch of GPUs, just like you said, even sometimes started in other areas and then moved into AI. Most of them don't have their own data centers. I mean, that's not a well-kept secret in the industry.
Right.
And so most of them are in various colos around the world. So I almost have a hard time classifying them in something that qualifies as a hyperscaler, because I feel like calling them a NeoCloud is a bit of cloud washing, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I mean, I think if we talked about the biggest clouds, and even the big 3 clouds or the big 4 clouds, like they mostly own all their own infrastructure, but then there's plenty of places where they're in the external regions and their edge pops and stuff that they do through colos too. But yeah, I think that categorization you have, where they're kind of an AI cloud, and they're probably you're right. Even using the word cloud with them is still a little bit kind of weird, because it's not a really on-demand business. It's a lot of buy capacity a year in advance, 2 years. People are buying up as much as they can for as long as they can. They don't own their own infrastructure, hence they're not doing all the optimizations that we've seen with Google Cloud and James Hamilton at AWS. And it almost feels like there's some variation of technology SI, specialized technology SIs, and then they do a little, they probably do a good amount of just sort of financial management, managing leases and managing, depreciation cycles on GPUs and managing, certain funding from an NVIDIA. So yeah, NeoCloud it's a name, but yeah, it does feel like a whole category that's kind of weirdly named or weirdly categorized.
And I feel like if there's an area where there is going to be ripe for consolidation in 2026, I think it's probably this area. And also too, I wouldn't be surprised if at some point I mean, because again, when it comes to GPUs, they're still hard to come by, especially that, the higher end stuff. Right. And so I wouldn't be surprised if, I mean, I don't mean to pick on them, but you go look at CoreWeave stock, they're just, they're sinking like a stone. And I wouldn't be surprised if a certain number of them just, get gobbled up by the hyperscalers. In 2026. I don't see this being any of them breaking out and becoming the next AWS.
No,
I just don't think it's
agree.
possible.
I agree. Well, and it's such a weird business. I mean, it's, you really kind of only exist because for a while, NVIDIA just didn't want to allow the big three hypervisors to have access to all of their supply. And, yet your entire business is based on an asset that, as best we can tell, sort of depreciates faster than other assets. It's harder to make them profitable. It's a weird business to be in. It would be interesting to talk to some of those folks. I don't know that we're gonna be able to get them on the show because I'm sure a lot of what they do, needs to sort of stay behind closed doors for various reasons. But fascinating. Sort of feels like very much a transitionary type of, I don't know, entity that has to exist until the AI industry matures more, not just because the cloud industry is pretty mature as it is. So
agreed.
So, and this is, I'm going to get into a little more of the sort of philosophical, this is sort of a philosophical question, but I'm curious your thoughts. So we started the year a lot this year because the end of last year, so the end of 2024-ish, December of 2024, Intel had decided to relieve Pat Gelsinger of his CEO duties or chairman duties, went in a different direction. And it was it was kind of I don't want to say it was like the death blow for Intel because Intel went through a lot of interesting things this year, but it got me thinking, especially in the context of cloud, our historian's going to look back and look at, roughly the 2007-ish timeframe when both AWS first came out, roughly, and the iPhone first came out. And Intel essentially made the decision and they said, we are going to basically bet on cloud. We're not going to bet on mobile. We're going to build chips for data centers. We're going to build chips for cloud. That looks like an extension of our own business. But ultimately, and again, for as big as the cloud has become, right, it's become a $300 billion business, actually probably far beyond that. But mobile has become a multi-trillion dollar business. Was that ultimately the point in which they made the biggest mistake, which was we didn't understand that volume over profit is just the future of chips? I got to thinking about that and I was like, I feel like when people write the history of Intel and they really think about it like that will sort of be the moment. It won't be the moment when it was like, oh, we brought back Pat Gelsinger and he, couldn't figure out how to turn the company around. I feel like maybe that was the moment. I only bring it up because I feel like this last year with Intel discussion was all sort of, it almost just felt like a postmortem on the whole company the whole year because it was all these kind of, weird things. They had a new CEO and then, they had this whole thing of like, the government had to bail them out and they didn't get their previous bailout money. But I got to thinking about it. I was like, I think their big mistake was 18 years ago, which, whether or not that's true or not, it does sort of give you a sense of like how far thinking in advance you have to be in the hardware business as opposed to the software business where we think about stuff in months. Like those guys, if they're not thinking out at least a decade and probably 15 years, they're not thinking out far enough. And that's crazy.
So first of all, 1000% agree with you. And actually, I never really thought of it of like cloud versus mobile. I never really thought of it in that way before, but completely agree. But also too, like in my head immediately goes to the architectures of like, okay, data center and data center processors and what does that look like? And then mobile and, and ARM processors and extremely low power processors. And what does that look like? Yep. But I'm going to throw a third one and I'm going to throw it back at you to ponder this. Could they also have potentially missed the whole idea, not necessarily of GPUs, but the concept of parallel processing, GPUs or parallel processing chips that maybe could have been AI, because at the end of the day, like, I'm not going to say NVIDIA was lucky. I'm never going to say that. But I am going to say at the end of the day, it was like, GPUs started out as gaming chips and happened to be a really good fit for AI, right?
Yeah.
And then they pivoted from there. They just happened to have a really good foundation to start from. Did Intel not only miss mobile, but did they miss parallel processing chips that eventually turned into AI chips? And so was it they missed two things in the one thing they doubled down on? What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, this is it. So it's a great question. I think it's going to be another one of those things that, you turned me on to this, I don't know, last year or 2 years ago.
The Acquired podcast?
Go out and listen to the series of there's like three of them, the Acquired podcast series on NVIDIA. And it's fascinating to sort of, see how much of their own destiny they controlled versus, other things, having, kind of happening, and then people being like, oh, I wonder what would happen if we did this in a parallel manner versus, just doing it on CPUs, and then being like, oh my God, and I think it's going to be very interesting, again, 10 years from now, depending on where NVIDIA is. Because, right now, everybody's like, NVIDIA is going to be, a gigantic company because, the future is going to, everybody says the future is going to be AI, and they're the biggest company in AI. So therefore they're going to be, they're a $5 trillion company today as of the end of 2025. I guess they'll be a 10 or 12, trillion dollar company within 10 years. But you sort of think back on that and you go, yeah, but 3 years ago, they were a $400 billion company, right? And
yes,
and they didn't invent generative AI. In fact, they had very little to do with generative AI, right? Like they, and again, go back and listen to that Acquired podcast. They do a fantastic job. It's gonna chew up 7 or 8 hours of your life, but it's well worth the time. I think to answer your question, I think NVIDIA, has done an excellent job of building, parallel computing chips. But I think they're in a moment right now where they look like geniuses, but, even through the crypto period of time, unless you lived in that world, like you weren't talking about NVIDIA, right? Like it was, I remember when they tried to buy ARM 3 or 4 years ago, in 2018, 2019 timeframe. And it was sort of like, oh, okay, well, they're just trying to consolidate the market because it seems like CPUs are sort of, going away, because we were watching what like AWS was doing with ARM. And in our mind, we were like, oh, well, they're just going to they're going to do system on a chip stuff, right? Like nobody was like, yeah, I mean, if you think about it now and you're like, oh, well, if they had gotten ARM, like would their Gen AI story be any different? You're probably like, no, not really. Because it's not like you can do fancy fancy stuff with ARM chips. Yeah. So, again, like I'm not downplaying the Intel thing or the NVIDIA thing. I think, there is some history of Intel trying to do parallel, they have some GPU efforts. They didn't necessarily work. That speaks to, NVIDIA's excellence in engineering and being better than Intel at engineering in that. But I don't know that Intel didn't do it. I think they didn't have a good enough product at the time when, parallelization sort of took off, and NVIDIA had already sort of staked that there. I think the difference between them, quote unquote, missing GPUs is more kind of engineering failure versus missing mobile, which was, we are absolutely not prepared to be able to deal with a different paradigm, which was smaller, small power, small footprint, and to realize, because, even if they had been a couple of years late, if they had committed to doing this stuff for Apple and for the iPhone, Apple might not have become this gigantic silicon company. Like they might have just been like, yeah, I don't need to own that, but it just wasn't there. And so, it was necessity is the mother of invention. So there will be some fascinating, historical things written, whether they're Harvard Business Review or not.
No, agreed. To your point though, you look at Apple, and you got to go way back in the history for this, but there was a time, Apple made its own chips.
Yeah.
And then there was a time those chips were so slow and got so slow and they fell so far behind, and then they just flipped to Intel, and everyone was so shocked when they flipped to Intel, and then it just got to the point the Intel chips didn't keep up, and then they've made their own, right? And so so to your point about I like that term paradigm shift, right? Like Apple was really good. I know we're talking about cloud here, but bear with me. So Apple was really good at knowing when and how to embrace a paradigm shift, whether it was get rid of their own and then eventually build their own. That's the one thing I think Intel, when we all look back on this, will say that they really missed, was that there was multiple paradigm shifts in the industry that Intel missed.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that, if you're just looking for patterns and stuff, like it does feel like if the paradigm shift is something that is bigger, more complicated computing, the company that excels in engineering is going to probably lead that, right? And like that was kind of Intel as they went from PC chips to server chips, right? Like they were vastly better at that, right? It's NVIDIA going from gaming GPUs to ChatGPT GPUs, right? Engineering. In the other direction, when the thing gets to be somewhat of a commodity and you're trying to drive cost out of it, that's where the company that has deep insights into how the market is changing can possibly do that. And that's where you've seen like AWS with Graviton, Google with TPUs, Apple with, building the smaller chips, although their chips are pretty robust. But for miniaturization, they learned that from the iPod and they took that to the iPhone. They were seeing it in the Mac as people wanted, mobile computing to be a big deal. So, I do feel like there are different characteristics. And then, nowadays you throw in the fact that, fabs are, everything runs through TMC or something like that. Like that changes some of the calculus a little bit, but, yeah, so it'll be, I think the other question that'll come out of this for the next 5 years, which I think is going to be fascinating, is, can the potential of AI at the chip level, become what people expect it to be if the most efficient way to get there is through the most expensive proprietary, chips and hardware, which is NVIDIA and CUDA, right? Or does it go through, is there in essence an Android to NVIDIA's GPUs? I think more than anything, that is going to be one of the most fascinating questions to watch from a pure hardware perspective over the next 3 to 5 years.
No, agreed.
To see
agreed. And we're going to do, the equivalent of this podcast for AI. And I have lots of opinions when it comes to all the various AI chips. So
let's get back to, let's shift back to cloud a little bit. We did a thing, and I'll have to put a link in the show notes because I'm sure there's a lot of folks who have, weren't listening back then. But we did a thing years and years ago where we did the cloud draft. I think it was you and me and a couple of other folks. And if you were drafting,
Nick maybe, but anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. I think it was Colin and Nick. If you were drafting the clouds right now, right? You probably there's probably only going to be like 2 rounds of picks, but you were drafting for you could draft for whatever you want. You could draft for revenue, you could draft for potential, whatever. How would you rank the clouds today, or what would be your first round pick if you were saying, I got to bet, I got to bet on what I think the next 5 years is going to look like for what the clouds are going to look like, and which one would you most like to own? Yeah.
So I feel like I've kind of backed myself into a corner over the years because I had a long running prediction, for those that don't know, of eventually Azure will beat AWS. And so I'm going to just continue to double down on that. And I'm just going to say Azure, because I think, still strong revenue growth, still doing really well. And I'm holding out hope that eventually, it is going to be the number one, and my long running prediction will come true. So I'm going to hold out for that, if nothing else than just to keep consistency over the years.
Okay. Well, that's fair. You, man? That's fair. Well, I guess if we were doing this as a snake draft, I would get the next 2 picks.
There you go.
And I think my picks would end up being, I think I would probably pick Google second, and I would pick Google third. I think, but in my ranking, I probably have them as,
Again, you said Google, and then you said Google.
I'm sorry, Google and then AWS.
Yeah.
So if I were ranking them for where I think they're going to be in 5 years, I think it'll be Google, I think it'll be AWS, and I think Azure will be third. And the reason for that is I think Google, given the importance of scale and AI in a bunch of their businesses. So whether it's, you think about the adjacent businesses they're in. So obviously, like advertising, basically still runs the bulk of the web that we all deal with every single day. So that is continues to benefit from Google scale. It continues to benefit from Google, the things that are doing with AI. You look at YouTube, which is basically the reason that Netflix is trying to make a huge bid for Warner Brothers, because YouTube has become almost, if not in the top 2 or top 3, the place where people spend their media time. Now, not necessarily their media dollars, but their media time. So they have that flywheel from a technology perspective that feeds back into other things that will be in their cloud. And then I think you look at like Waymo, and we're just beginning to start to see the scale of like autonomous vehicles and the businesses that can go along with that. I think those are really, really interesting properties that flywheel wise, I think are bigger and more impactful to where the cloud's going to go than anybody else has as a collective thing. And it does feel like, after a few years in the wilderness and in the woods, Google has finally figured out where to consolidate the right engineering teams. Their technology's starting to hit on all cylinders. They're starting to do it profitably. I feel like they have, at least at this point, the most momentum, and then the most ancillary things that will, kind of be force multipliers of that momentum. And I think the question with AWS ultimately boils down to, I think they will continue to scale the business. I think they run the most profitable business. I think they will continue to figure out ways to make working with the cloud simpler, or cost effective, or whatever that might be. I wonder if it's like we've said a lot of times with a lot of like startups, like it's amazing when companies get the first thing right, and sometimes there are complete unicorns in getting that right. And obviously AWS from a cloud perspective got so many things right, but it's really hard to get the second thing right. And oftentimes the thing that you're best at often then becomes your worst enemy in a next phase of it. And I think AWS right now is struggling with, and maybe this will come back around to it, but right now they are struggling with the fact that for 20 years, everything they've built has been primitives. They've never really got into the solution space. They've never really owned applications that people, feel like they rely upon. People have built applications on AWS. And I think, AI, at least for now, is pushing people into the realm of give me immediate satisfaction, give me immediate solutions. And it'll be interesting to see if that trend continues. And if that's the case with AI, and that's the way people consume the cloud, that kind of goes against AWS. If it's just a short-term thing and eventually people are like, no, I want primitives back again, then maybe the AWS style in the AI world comes back again. But I think they still have the greatest advantage of it is a profit machine. That was literally the first thing that Matt Garman talked about this year at reInvent, was he wanted to remind people we print money. Don't forget that we print money. So and I'm not as bullish about Azure, even though it is the most tapped into of all the enterprise ones. I just feel like they, at this point, own so little of the things that you need to control for your destiny that at least the other two have much more control over what they do. Yeah. They're either better at the cloud or they're better at AI than Azure is in both of them.
No, and I'll give you while we're talking about AWS though, at the end there, I'll give you a pro and a con for AWS. And this is the biggest thing I've been thinking about with them recently. Cause I was thinking about like, okay, what have they done that's been exciting? Like we talked about GCP.
Well, hold on to that. Cause I was going to frame that. We had a question of if you were running AWS, where do you think you would go next? So give me your pros and cons, but also think about it in the context of if you were, Matt Garman or, maybe whoever, replaces Matt Garman in 3 or 5 years, but whatever, if you were trying to think about, I'm advising Matt Garman or Andy Jassy over where the next 3 to 5 years go, where do you think that is? But start with your pros and cons.
Yeah. So my pros and cons. So pros are, the Trainium chips, the Trainium chips are pretty amazing, good results, do well. And actually on the AI side, the Bedrock service is pretty fantastic. And, it's in my day job, we've partnered with them on a bunch of stuff, and it's actually they've got their shit together, like compared to, a lot of the other primitives. And that feels more so like a solution. And that's where, I worry about the con is, again, I'm going to use that term paradigm shift again, this paradigm shift away from primitives. So you nailed it when you said like, hey, at the end of the day, they're building a bunch of primitives. I don't know that everyone wants primitives when it comes to AI. And so where does AWS go next, or where, in 3 to 5 years, I feel like the pieces are all there. Like, yeah, they've got a lot of great primitives, but they need to pull them all together. And I hate to say it, but look at what GCP is doing and kind of, hey, go steal a little bit of GCP. Like, you got a lot of primitives, you've got a full stack solution. You're just not quite putting it together in a way that's enticing to most customers that are out there, right? Like, I feel like they are the closest ones if they really just kind of pulled their shit together, they have the pieces already.
Right.
It's not like, oh, we're behind in chips and it's going to take us 3 to 5 years to make some chips. They've actually got some great chips. And so I feel like top to bottom, it's like this jigsaw puzzle, but all the pieces are just scattered on the floor right now. Like they're just not together in any.
No, I think that's right. I think if you asked whether it was Andy Jassy or, what was the guy who took over from Andy?
Garmin?
Not Garmin, the guy in between. Shoot, we've already forgotten his name. But anyways, I think as they were laying out their initial AI strategy, and if you went back, even to 2020, and they started talking about Trainium chips, and they started talking about Inferentia chips, and they started talking about, kind of having, they had data services, for a while. And I think as they were laying it out, and even as Bedrock was coming along, and it was like, hey, we're going to give you choice in models because not everyone's going to want one model. And I think in their mind, they were like, this is the blueprint because in their mind, AI was just an extension of cloud. It was the next, I think the thing that they might have missed was like, it's a paradigm. It's not a set of features, because the thing they built was exactly what you would have expected AI to build, or AWS to build, which was like primitives with choice that, gave you, a set of t-shirt sizes for the compute that you could use, a set of choices, just like databases for the AI models you could use. Certain amounts of it was on demand. Certain amount of it was self-service. I think if you went back and sat in those rooms 5 years ago, they probably felt super confident. And I suspect the thing that they are probably really struggling with right now, or at least, are probably coming to grips with is, exactly like you said, that at least for right now, they sort of miss the thing, which was, and I forget how Ben Thompson always frames it, but he's like, at the beginning of transitions, people want integrated systems because they kind of want something that just works right now. And then over time, they want disaggregated systems. And I think the thing with AWS is they got into the business when people were frustrated with, they were frustrated with IT, and IT had always kind of given them like aggregated systems. And so they came along and they were the disaggregator. And now AI has come back along and they've been like, well, we're doing bundling again. And I think all those things you said are right. I think the question would be, where would you go from here if you were them? Because I think that's that's really the, at least $1 billion question is, how much emphasis do you have to put on the Nova models? Do you have to have a ChatGPT for the enterprise? Do you have to have, some simple way to, quickly get a customer's data, sort of trained or, whatever the right word is, tuned into specific models, right? The sort of, like what other things do they need, like ASAP to be really relevant, I think is the question. And then I think, the second piece of it becomes, they're probably going to have to throw out, I don't know if they have to throw out their playbook, but I do think they probably have to take a page out of what Google did, which was we were too distributed. We have too many teams working on parallel iterations of it. And I think AWS is guilty of that. I mean, they've got a million different pizza teams doing different stuff. They haven't gone through their let's rationalize things to get the best out of a centralized thing yet, at least as far as we know.
Yeah, agreed.
Last question I had on my thing, and I'll sort of wrap this up. I don't know what the right answer to this is. I had, you mentioned earlier, do cloud outages matter anymore if they're only like once a year from a specific cloud? Like, I mean, obviously, AWS had an outage this year. It was a classic US East 1 outage. Cloudflare had an outage, second half of the year for, a few hours. We all everybody learned who Cloudflare was because their favorite website didn't work. But if it's not of the magnitude of the one that happened a couple years ago, where it was like taking down airlines and stuff, do you think it really matters that much? I mean, obviously people are still concerned about it. They still take security very seriously, but like, we used to make a big deal about cloud outages. Do you feel like they're a real event anymore, or they're just sort of like, okay. Sometimes the computers go down and then they come back. And as long as they come back within the same day, I mean, I feel like people sort of have become accustomed to that, but I don't know. Do you get a different sense that maybe not?
No, I've two ways to go with this one. Number one, as I kind of mentioned earlier, I'm not going to say, I'm going to say at this point, the solutions architecture behind the scenes is well known enough to where if companies really wanted to bulletproof their systems, they could. And so what you see with a lot of times here is, so why do they not do it? Well, either A, it's too complex, B, it's too costly, or, you're going to take some kind of downtime. You might be able to come back sooner on something else, but you never know when it's going to come back. If it's going to come back in a couple hours, like everyone kind of does that analysis of like, hey, if it's only going to go down for a couple hours, like, what's that worth to me? Is it worth building in that redundancy and all this complexity and all these other things? Most companies have now opted to go, nah, we're good. Like, and so for me, until we have an outage like we did years ago, where it's like a multi-day outage, I think everyone's just going to kind of like, the companies are like, look, I'm not going to solve for that problem. And us at the end users, we're going to go, well, that's okay. Like the sites are down for a little bit. It's like a snow day for us here, in North Carolina. You get a little bit of snow and everything shuts down and everyone goes crazy and we all just stay home. Like, I just feel like it's like, we'll try later. Now, I mean, is it inconvenient? Sure. And there's like people that like, hey, I had to travel here and I couldn't, or whatever. Like, right, I get it. There's absolutely, I don't want to minimize, people's heartache over this, but I think the general consensus is by both the people that design the systems as well as people that use the systems. Everyone's like, if it's just a couple hours and it's once or twice a year, no big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like it's in the same category as like sort of political outrage, right? Oh, it was something today. And then the next day you're like, oh, it's something else. And I think until one of the outages becomes something that was like, oh, we have never seen an outage like that before, right? Where it's, I feel like these things all ultimately are like, yeah, we can blame this thing or that thing, but ultimately it was like this, least common denominator thing, which is just a tool that happens in the background of whatever, it got overwhelmed, and then the downstream systems got overwhelmed, and we just had to shut the system off so that it stopped cascading. Like, I feel like every one of them is some variant of that. And yeah, until there's some other thing that comes along, maybe it'll be a nation state attack or something like that, or something else. I think you're right. We're just not going to pay. We're just not going to pay for the resiliency of it. People are just like, yeah.
And the other thing I would add to all of that too is, here's the thing. At the end of the day, like a lot of the companies, like they didn't get blamed for it, like Cloudflare did, or they didn't get blamed for it. AWS did, and so like as long as it's on the companies to kind of go, oh no, wasn't me, it was AWS. Like
right.
Like no one. At the end of the day, like. You could have said to those companies, well, you should have designed your ship better, but no one said you should have designed your ship better. Everyone just kind of went, it's AWS.
I know.
No big deal.
I know. We're well past the days of like everybody being bad at stuff except for Netflix. And now it's just like, it just happens. Everyone's just got that dependency. So, all right, man. Well, I think that was pretty thorough for sort of state of where the cloud is today. Some awards given out to people. We went for quite a while. We did our normal thing of almost going an hour at these end of the year shows. We're right around 50 minutes. So that'll be good. I think the AI one might actually go a little longer. I'll have to be careful about that. But we will. We do have some fairly large changes coming for 2026 for the podcast. We will hold on to those. I think we'll start talking about them around the last show of the year, and then the first couple in January. So no big changes coming until February. I think that's the plan we have.
Yeah,
but
that's the goal.
Some changes are coming. The good news is none of you will have to do anything different. Hopefully, just it'll be just better. It'll just be better, and that's the goal. But we'll tease that a little bit. But man, wrap it up. Any last thoughts on cloud, or feel like we covered it pretty well?
No, I think we covered it pretty well, and I think it's definitely been an interesting year. And it's been, for me, like cloud in 2025 was like a little bit more of the same, but also at the same time, some things like really fundamentally changed. I do think we are at a point where everything's going to really kind of shift going forward.
Yep. Well, this was show 985 of the Cloudcast. We are getting dangerously close to 1,000. So we'll have to put something together very, very cool for 1,000. I don't think we ever thought we'd get to 100, let alone 500. But we're creeping up on 1,000. So I guess that means, if nothing else, it means we are. We are consistent, and we are old. So those two things have not changed. So, all right, man. Well, good talking to you. I will talk to you again soon, because we're going to knock out a few more of these. And folks, thanks for listening. Thanks for another great year with us. We appreciate it. Thanks for telling a friend about the show and helping us grow the community. And with that, we'll wrap it up and talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.